Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here today for Publicate 2020. I'm joined today by Dr. Sandra van Lente and Dr. Anamik Saha, co-authors of Rethinking Diversity in Publishing, which is a report in collaboration with Spread the Word and Bookseller magazine. Anamik, Sandra, hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for being here. I'm really excited to talk about the report today. It's an astonishing achievement that's kind of, I think, been felt across the whole industry. So just to start, would you be able to just talk me through the process that led to this report being published?
Yeah, I'm my days, Joe. This was like 5 years in the making. This is a very long process. It builds on some of the research that I've been doing over the past 10 years, which has been looking at the experience of racial and ethnic minorities in the media. My starting point for that was, generally speaking, in race and media research. Sorry if this is going to be a bit academic, but bear with me for a second. So in race and media research, the tendency is to focus on representation. How are Black or Asian people and so on and so forth being represented in this particular text, whether a TV show, a film, book, and so on and so forth. And I felt that a big gap was the issue of how these representations get made in the first place. So here's a bit of an anecdote. When I was doing my PhD, I looked specifically at British South Asian cultural producers working across 3 industries: television, publishing, and theatre. And prior to that, I worked in the media and I hung out in these kind of circles. So I'd meet other British Asians such as myself, and we'd get talking and I'd want to learn more about their work and what they were doing. They were like authors or playwrights or filmmakers and so on. And we'd all and they expressed quite explicitly how they were fed up and frustrated and angry about the ways in which British Asians were represented in the media, and that they wanted to challenge us through their art. And so in that conversation, that's great. That aligns with my politics. That was music to my ears, and we'd get on, it'd be brilliant. And we'd stay in touch. And then I'd go and see their work. And it was, another play about honor killing, another documentary on terrorism, or another book with, a cover of an Indian woman in a sari running barefoot across the marble floor. And I wanted to know, and so there was a disconnect there between what they were saying and what was being produced. And on the one hand, I thought, well, are they being disingenuous? Were they just a bunch of sellouts? But clearly that wasn't the case. Clearly there was something going on in the production process that was steering them in this way, in a way that they ended up reproducing the very stereotypes that they sought to challenge in the first place. So from that, I've kind of started focusing on, the production process, the production of culture, if you like. And so this project kind of built on that, some of which was already on publishing. This project built on that. Sandra was someone I met through doing that early research into publishing. And again, there was clear parallels in the kind of work we were both interested in. So yeah, we set off putting this project together over 5 years ago now. We Spread the Word initially, and then the bookseller came on board later on. And we wanted to do a proper in-depth study of how the publishing industry publishes writers of colour in general. We were lucky enough to get the money, thank God, because if we hadn't, I think I would have thrown myself out the window because it was such a long, laborious process. So that's kind of the story behind where the project came from and how it came about.
Wow. So Sandra, how did you come into that? Was it 5 years ago that you came on board?
The specific project, yes. I was still teaching in Berlin, I think, and I wrote my PhD on contemporary British novels that dealt with people from different cultural backgrounds, and I felt the same frustration. I was reading about all these honor killings, but the same stereotypes all over again. And then I was wondering, is it because that's what the authors want to write about? Is it the packaging? Sometimes the packaging and the content of the books didn't really match. And that made me curious. And then the way literary studies is taught here often is very, very text focused. And I wanted to, see what the production process does with these books. And so, yeah, this is how we started talking. And then, yeah, we went through this very long process of applying for the grant, and then we got it.
And so I didn't realize it was a 5-year process. That's incredible. So is it therefore complete coincidence that the report happened to be published right at the point where these kind of conversations are at the forefront of public consciousness?
Yeah, even more so actually, because we aimed to publish the report a bit earlier for London Book Fair, but then because we found so many people we wanted to interview and so many people who agreed to talk to us, we decided to do more interviews than initially planned for, and then just postpone the launch. And nobody could have known that we're gonna launch it at this specific point in time. That was something else.
Yeah, no, Sandra, that's the official version Sandra gave. Basically, we were a bit slow writing the report. It took a little bit slow. That's fair, Sandra, isn't it? We just took a little bit.
We did interview more people too.
Yeah, we did interview more people, so that's correct. But I was actually in the run-up when the whole Black Lives Matter protest started happening and unfolding. There was a slight concern, actually, that this report might get buried in a way, because, you know, I mean, Black Lives Matter, we're literally talking about matters of life and death, and all of a sudden, the kind of report on diversity in the publishing industry, the most privileged cultural industry of them all, you know, let's face it, that issue all of a sudden, for me personally, and I know Sandra shared this, it felt a little bit trivial, actually. Yeah. But what became evident was how that moment had produced a really profound reckoning with the issue of race and racism across society, not least the publishing industry, which, you know, has seen some amazing activism and campaigning in recent years. And this moment kind of created this groundswell, and what we actually found was, rather than this area feeling like potentially being a victim of fatigue in the industry about talking about these issues, actually, on the contrary, it came at a time when the publishing industry was looking really deeply inside itself. And I know there's been reports like this, you know. In fact, one important detail was that I met Spread the Word shortly after they published Writing the Future, and they were looking to do a follow-on project. So if you notice, this was 5 years since that report, Writing the Future report, which is another really influential piece of work, came out. So there's been reports like this in the past. But yeah, I think that moment, as I said, has kind of produced this real moment of really serious introspection, certainly initially, at least. And I'm personally really pleased that the report has helped give people an anchor, if you like, or the material or the evidence to kind of, you know, actually show them what we found, and, you know, without overselling the research, how things are. And yeah, and it gives them an anchor from which they can start thinking about how they can start transforming their own organizations, whether they're massive publishing houses or, you know, small independent presses.
Yeah, I think it's something that I'm loath to say enjoyed about the report, because obviously it's devastating, a lot of stuff that comes out, but something I found fascinating conceptually about the report is that you've approached almost every sector of the industry. There seems to be a kind of pattern within the publishing world of shifting the blame from, you know, the booksellers saying it's the publisher's fault, the publisher saying it's the agent's fault, and round in a circle like that. When you were conducting the interviews, did you get the impression that there was a specific sector that held more responsibility and had greater accountability for these issues?
Sandra, do you want to tell us?
It's hard to say. I find this really hard to say, because everyone plays their role in this whole process. But I think that especially agents at the beginning play such a crucial role, because almost all editors we spoke to said they're not really reading through the slush pile anymore. So that's maybe the one. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Anamik?
Well, I mean, clearly, like, agents and editors are kind of seen as the key gatekeepers. And with this project, I was really eager to shed more light on the promotional side, especially marketing, and then that leading into book selling. Primarily because those stages of production process don't really get that attention. And people, when they talk about, you know, how can we improve diversity in, you know, in these cultural industries, they don't really speak to the head of marketing, you know. And so actually, you know, our hunch was that each of these stages of production were really key and were going to be really influential. But I was really, you know, I think that marketing, promotion, communication side, I think, is a really underrated, if you like, moment in terms of the effect and influence it has on the careers as well as the books of writers of colour.
Yeah, there's a really quite harrowing quote you have in the report where a kind of high up publishing official says, well, a book with a black girl on the cover isn't going to sell. And, you know, that's a horrific thing to hear coming from someone with that kind of power and influence.
I was amazed that we were still hearing those stories, actually. There's been a lot of, you know, there has been a lot of progress made, I think, especially since the Writing the Future report from 2015. I think there has, not least, you know, publishers are more aware of how certain, you know, I guess, you know, that kind of brazen comment was yeah, it was very surprising to hear. And we heard it several times, actually. And we, you know, speaking to designers in particular, there was, you know, I remember one person saying they were in a meeting just very recently where they were told that having a person of colour on the front would, you know, have a detrimental effect on the sales. So these things still exist. I actually expected them to be there, but just buried a bit, you know, and everyone says the right thing, but actually there's still a, you know, a kind of the same assumptions are still being reproduced. So it was surprising to hear some of those things said so explicitly, actually.
Yeah, and one of these assumptions that seems to be prevalent in every sector where you've interviewed people is this assumption that your readership is white and middle class. So Sandra, in the interviewing process, did you find anyone that gave the impression that there might be a way of changing that narrative?
Oh yes, yeah, definitely. So there is hope. But I thought a bit about this, and it was actually often people who had their own personal interest and agenda to push these books forward, or well, most of all, also independent publishers who are sometimes run by one or two people. And yeah, they, I mean, we asked them these questions like, oh, what do you think? Who reads your books, and where do you find your readers? And they just go out and find them. So it is more work than just like going down the road you take every time, but it's possible. And I remember this one person who was talking about a book that they launched connected to a music gig, and they felt that sometimes there was such a huge barrier to go to a literary festival that seems a bit posh, where people, I don't know, always brag about like, oh, have you read this book? Have you read that book? And so they tried to create an atmosphere where people would just like enjoy themselves, have a good time, don't feel that they have to know and have, know all the books that are out this year. And they sold lots of books at these events. So that was one example. But yeah, there were others who just said like, yeah, just like the beauty of digital communication is you can find target groups, you can find your audiences and talk to them directly. Yes, it is more work than putting out an ad in the Guardian or whatever. Sorry,
That's fine.
the reviewer to review you in, I don't know, one of the other major national newspapers, and people do read them still apparently. So yes, there is an effect. However, if you put in the work, you can see that it works, and so that gave me hope.
Conversely, I remember we spoke to a person of colour who works in a fairly, you know, a serious editorial role, and they were like lamenting how they really wanted the book. They were finding amazing authors, and they produced, you know, from racial, ethnic, minority backgrounds, and other marginalised backgrounds rather, and they felt that they were unable to reach you know, audiences beyond that set core. And they were like, you know, and this was really tragic for them because they knew that these books could speak more to more broader audiences, but they didn't have the resources to do that. Interestingly, they were working within one of the big publishing houses, and it seemed to us, it was very clear that when we spoke to independent presses, they were much more engaged with that non-traditional publishing kind of like a book reading audience. They would much, especially when they were run by people from marginalised backgrounds themselves, they were a part of those communities. So it felt more intuitive to sell books in that way, and beyond those usual mainstream channels. So there was a clear difference. And actually one of the things that I know I regret in the report, and we couldn't go into more, there was lots of things we could have gone into much more detail, but the differences between the way in which big publishers behave and independents behave was clear. I don't want to romanticize, saying that, I don't want to romanticize independence as like they're always this kind of alternative, subversive, radical, you know, sometimes they can work in exactly the same profit-minded ways as big major companies, and that's absolutely fine, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But undeniably, especially when kind of issues of race and ethnicity come into the picture, there's some very different practices which the bigger publishing houses can absolutely learn from.
Yeah, that's something that that was kind of curious in the report about, like, I guess smaller presses generally, because, you know, profit margins in publishing are low as it is. And so generally these smaller presses are driven more from a kind of personal point of view. I guess that's another question I have about, and this might sound like a cynical question, but do you think these large publishers are actually capable of instigating any change if there's no clear financial incentive for them?
I would say there is a clear financial incentive for them. It's just something that they don't seem to see. And that's one of the reoccurring themes in our report too, that as long as they see their audience as being so narrow, they won't see the financial argument. So I think it's kind of like coming for,
But it does make you think about what is holding them back, because clearly there's a financial incentive in reaching like new audiences. This is what, you know, this is the absolute kind of core, you know, purpose of marketing, right? It's to discover new audiences and sell stuff to them in order to make more money, right? And so the inability for the big publishing houses to do that, the refusal of the big publishing houses to do that, suggests that there's something more at play than just a kind of blind spot. It seems to me there's something about, you know, without getting really kind of heavy-handed about it, there's something ideological about the way in which publishing houses are only invested in one particular audience, which happens to be an audience that shares very much the same kind of status, class position as the big publishers do, you know? So there's something there which I'm looking forward to exploring more, certainly in terms of like the academic outputs we might produce out of this, is thinking about that, you know, what is the, if you like, the ideological effects of publishing houses kind of only being focused on this one audience. It seems to me we're going beyond the question of like where the money is or publishing as a business model. Then it becomes about publishing as a kind of key cultural institution that's sustaining particular hierarchies in place in society.
Yeah, I mean, there's something I find really troubling that comes up quite a lot in the report is like that people even raise a question about the quality of the writing from BAME communities. Like, to me, that just sounds like quite open racism. Do you think it is that simple?
We agree. It is. I mean, and in fact, when we interviewed people about quality, I think that's when some of the most troubling stuff kind of came out. But I guess the point is, though, is that, you know, the very notion of quality and what is good and what is bad hides any underlying racist, kind of classist, you know, homophobic assumptions that shape what quality is. You know, classical sociology has shown, you know, for decades how kind of the kind of dominant culture, if you like, the dominant classes use culture as a way to maintain their status and position. And they do that by kind of you know, setting the bar for what is good and what is bad. You know, and so the idea that the reason why, I mean, it's, when you say it this way, it seems so blatantly racist. So it's really amazing how many people kind of said this, but the fact that the idea that, you know, by publishing more writers of color, you're compromising on quality. I mean, that is astonishing. That is absolutely astonishing. I mean, you know, it's when you know, we've got in interviews, it's about keeping the poker face. We've got to keep a measured academic kind of approach to these things. But yeah, it was really troubling to hear that. But then also it shows precisely what the problem was. When publishing is so monocultural, and I'm talking about the core publishing industry here. I wouldn't want to include smaller presses in this because we met, you know, many more kind of radical people in those settings. But nonetheless, you know, when the core publishing industry is so monocultural, where they all essentially went to the same universities, where they all did the same kind of English literature courses, where they all studied the same canon of English literature, which, you know, in recent times especially has been exposed for being so Eurocentric, then clearly that is one of the key things that needs dislodging and dismantling, I think. How long it will take to do that, I don't know. But, you know, I think that's, if we're talking about radical transformation, that very notion of quality is what needs to be kind of, you know, poked at and dislodged, I think.
Sorry. Thanks. I think it's interesting that even within that, those parameters of quality that have been set by a certain social class, there's still, like, there's a quote in the report where someone says, I think they're referring to publishers, that they'll spend an awful lot of money on books that are shit.
Yeah.
And this idea that, like, for people from marginalized backgrounds, there is not the space to be shit. You have to be the kind of Bernardine Evaristos of this world if you want to get anywhere. Whereas, you know, there's a huge amount of people who I won't mention, white authors who publish rubbish, but still have access to that money. I found that to be quite a powerful quote.
One of the kind of starting points for this kind of the kind of key research questions were, do writers of color have the same creative freedoms as their white counterparts? And we were thinking about the ways in which, you know, Black and Asian authors get pigeonholed in very particular ways according to their racial ethnic identity. But one of the things that kind of, you know, I've been thinking more about is, it's not even about creative freedom, but do they have the freedom to fail as much as their white counterparts? And I think Abir Mukherjee said this in one of the one of the kind of conversations we had as part of the launch week, where he says he wants to be able to, he would love the privilege of being able to write shit white, you know, science fiction like other white male authors, you know.
Yes.
And the thing is that there's so much invested in writers of color that if they do fail, not only is it a failure for them personally, you know, they're less likely either to get another book contract, or they'll have even less money spent on their next book. But also it impacts the rest of the community of writers of color. Sorry, we tried this Black science fiction writer, it failed, so the science fiction audiences clearly aren't interested. And and there's so many assumptions there. I mean, there's so little actual, publishers will make kind of pretty bold assumptions without any kind of evidence, really. And even when that evidence is presented to them, they'll take the bits that fit their agenda, but essentially, you know, use whatever data evidence is out there to reinforce those assumptions rather than kind of really rethink it. So that ability to fail, I think, is a real privilege in creative industries more generally. The only just another little anecdote, which is kind of related, but I remember speaking to a fairly junior person of color who worked in a publishing house, and she was kind of lamenting it. She's like, she wants to be able to be as mediocre as the white colleague who sits next to her, you know. And I wanted to share this with publishing houses, like in the webinars, but I forgot to do so. But they all know these people. They all know someone in their office who's not pulling their weight, who's a bit of a dosser, who either whatever is lacking in so many ways. But for a person of colour, if you minute you kind of show any kind of, weakness, which are natural, we all have our weaknesses and foibles, and I know I have tons, very lazy, but generally speaking, you get exposed. You're exposed. I mean, not least because you're literally the only person in the office who's black or brown, but you're getting marks according to different genders, which is really troubling.
That's it's horrible. It's truly horrible.
I wish I could be as mediocre as
that's what a situation to be in where that's what you're saying you want. So just to move on, something that I wanted to touch on as well is this report it's more than just a kind of academic study into the kind of the evidence for these claims. It's also a call to action for these organizations. So how's the response been to that? Have you had much response from these organizations yet?
Yes, we had. And I mean, from the beginning, the report was planned to be for the industry rather than another academic publication. And we saw some like individual replies to us, but also statements from the Society of Authors, for example, or just like a week or two after the report, Penguin Random House introduced their like faster new diversity scheme, something like that. They also reacted to the Publishing Paid Me and the Black Writers Guild, of course. But we saw some of those, and there is an interest in these in-house talks that Anamik mentioned, because they know they can't go on like this.
I guess the fear is, with Black Lives Matter, I mean, one of the most astonishing things about the protest and what unfolded was the ways in which all the kind of key institutions, from like media industries to football and sport to corporate brands, were like releasing all these statements, right, of support for the Black Lives Matter protest, and in doing so, recognised and highlighted the real forms of structural racism that still determine people's life chances, right? Which, it wasn't so long ago that following the election of Obama, we were told we were living in these post-race times. So, and trying to bring up racism all of a sudden was like a really contentious issue. The fact if you brought up racism, you were the one being racist somehow. These were the crazy times we were in, and we've kind of done a complete U-turn on that. And following this really amazing kind of activism and campaigning around, this really a whole history of really horrific instances of racial violence. The question is, though, of course, is to what extent, this has been talked about by plenty of people and commentators, is to what extent are these statements performative and mere gestures? A lot of these organisations talking about Black Lives Matter, treat their own black employees in horrific ways, right? And host a whole range of racial exclusionary practices and so on. So the big challenge for us is to ensure. And we were really blown away actually by the response from the industry more broadly. I mean, social media is a really great way to see how these conversations are going on, and generally everyone, no one we were not worried. I was interested to see if it would provoke a defensive reaction from some of the Publishers Association or the publishing houses, but actually that hasn't seemed to happen. Who knows what happens inside these, the executive suites, if you like. But the challenge now is to ensure that it's not. And I've been really kind of happy to see certain publishing houses kind of discuss this report in detail. We have heard that these things are happening, and we have been invited to come back and kind of give talks and so on. But I think that the challenge of like, how can we actually how this report can lead to meaningful change. I mean, that's ongoing. I mean, and the other thing as well, Joe, is that, these issues are deeply, deeply entrenched. So I'm under no illusions that the publishing industry is going to be able to fix it like that, and I think, and sometimes people who kind of write these reports, there's criticism of the industry for like, well, you know, we've got another report and still no change has happened. And I can kind of, you know, this is a very, very, I can kind of sympathize with the industry because this stuff is so entrenched that you can't just fix it overnight. That is not to say we shouldn't be trying, or, you know, publishing industries shouldn't be putting this at the top of their agenda. Yeah, that's so yeah, this is always a challenge with this kind of work, with any kind of like academic research that is looking to have an actual impact upon, you know, society. This is always a challenge because this stuff is hard to undo, but we've got to start somewhere.
And so because you mentioned when we first got on the call that this is officially the last day of the project today, for you're going on annual leave and it's coming to an end. What is the vision for continuing to hold people accountable beyond the project?
Well, we want to continue the conversations. So, time willing, because I've got a lot of teaching next term. But we need to be able to continue the conversations. One of the best things about this project was the collaboration with Spread the Word, the bookseller, and also Words of Colour, who are the kind of PR agency or strategic communications agency who we worked with, who kind of basically managed the launch. And the collaboration worked brilliantly, actually, considering we all come from very different come with slightly different agendas, not very different, but slightly different agendas, and come from different spaces of the industry. That collaboration has been amazing. And so having those three partners I think will be really beneficial in terms of being able to keep the conversation going. I know the bookseller won't let this, like, you know, will ensure that this is constantly a news cycle. Similarly, Spread the Word have been doing campaigning around these issues for a very long time, and so they will, you know, continue to do that. From an academic point of view, we're already looking at other kind of research that, like, you know, kind of revenue streams that we can apply for, that where we can kind of, I would like to do something that it's less about doing new research, but actually more about kind of really kind of reaching out to the industry and you know, whatever that might take, whether it's workshops or seminar talks or whatever other kinds of, you know, activities that can, you know, help publishers. In this instance, you know, one of the main findings of the report, one of the main outcomes of the report is that publishers, you need to broaden your understanding of who your audience is. You need to broaden that audience. And in order to, you know, to do that, that takes a lot of work and various types of initiatives. So that's something that I think I hope will come out of this project on those lines.
And I also think, or at least from what I heard from some of the interviewees I spoke with after the launch, they will also continue the conversation in-house. They said that they found this report helpful to, help them make their points. And this is definitely another how this is going to have a legacy in a way. I'll be back in Germany and trying to convince our industry that, yes, we should look more into diversity, and because the discussion here is quite different to yours, and we still have the NBA. I know that this makes our system a lot different. However, it's a disgrace, really. So we don't even have numbers to compare, and even though it's not only about numbers, this whole discussion is not where we could be. So another hope of mine is that we can also learn from this project and take it a step further in Germany.
It's been really interesting to see actually how the report has been received beyond the UK actually. So Germany, obviously, thanks to Sandra's own kind of work around there, but we've heard from Spain. I think the report's going to be translated into Spanish as well. So to see it kind of spread in that way is really interesting. As Sandra says, you know, these conversations are happening at a different pace in different ways in different international contexts, but fundamentally it's about kind of racial inequality, you know, which all nations have a history of and issues with. So if the report can contribute in that way beyond, you know, that would be incredible, really.
Do you know if it's crossed over to the US at all?
No, haven't quite cracked the US yet. But that's a really, you know what, that's a really interesting question, actually. I think, I mean, obviously, the US publishing industry is very different to the UK. From what I understand, they actually do much better in terms of the kind of racial ethnic makeup of the industry. I think, Sandra, do you have any?
I don't really have any numbers, but I saw some people on Twitter from the US reply to our tweets and so on. So something resonated with them too, definitely.
Yeah, I think they've got a history, especially in independent publishing, of like, like a strong tradition of like African-American Latinx publishers. I think the scene there is, really strong actually. And I think their demographics of a nation are such that they can be sustained by, particular racial and ethnic minority groups. One of the big challenges for UK publishers, or the assumption they work with, is that we can't just focus on the Asian audience because it's not big enough to sustain a book.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at a lot of literary presses, they're basically just focusing on the same 3,000 people in North London. They're just a significant section of the sector of the publishing industry, like literary presses. That was something from a marketing person said that to us. So again, it's totally disingenuous. But in the US, it's a very different scene. But at the same time, there's got to be overlap and resonances. So, you know what? Yeah, Joe, that's something that we should definitely look into.
That'd be exciting. Yeah. So I won't keep you much longer, but there's just got a few more things. So one thing I'd like, kind of for the benefit of our audience, you recommend in your call to action that organizations there are kind of development schemes and other organizations that publishers should partner with. How can writers and people who want to get into industries access these organizations? And what are these organizations?
Okay, well, in England, there are, I think, 7 writing development organizations. Spread the Word is one of them. And I know Writing West Midlands quite well, but there's also Writing East Midlands. There's the National Centre for Writing, Literature Works, New Writing North. So there are quite a number of them, and they all run their separate schemes. It's really easy to find out about them. They have nice websites. They are on Twitter. They are on Instagram. They're all over the place. So if you are a writer and you're interested, you can have a look at that. There's a recent project called Take Flight Hub. It's UCL partnering up with Words of Color and Spread the Word again. And it's especially made for writers of color who want to learn more about the industry, demystify the process, and so on. So that's another good one to check out. And then there is the Spark Young Writers Group, for example, that actually starts with children. So starting the pipeline very early. I think it's run by Writing West Midlands also. And it just proves that there's really a wide selection of things to do. I know that that Creative Scotland is also doing programs. Well, Literature Wales. I'm not sure about the details in Northern Ireland, but just check out those bigger organizations and then take it from there. Follow them on Twitter. It's as easy as that sometimes. Spend half an hour or an hour, and then you'll find more coming up. And actually, lots of authors have been great championing these projects as well. Follow those, have a look at what they share, and interestingly, most of these things are also free to join, or for a very small fee, like £10 or something like that. So you don't have to do the big creative writing degree if you don't want to. And it's also not all in London. That's something I wanted to emphasize. So check it out.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
That was exhaustive. So.
That was great. That was really great.
That's something that's absolutely there's this infrastructure here. There is a network. It's, unfortunately doesn't always get the recognition, let alone the kind of resources to support the important work that it's doing. And one of the big, recommendations is that these schemes and, these networks need to be funded properly. I'd also add, smaller presses as well. I think especially those that champion and provide a platform for writers from marginalised groups. I think there needs to be, a serious discussion about the kind of public funding that should be made available for those kind of organisations that are giving to a platform and giving a voice to people belong to communities that have, generally been invisible or just haven't had that the ability to kind of tell its own stories in the way that I want to tell them. So, and independent presses as well, smaller presses, often give the writers the autonomy and freedom to tell the stories that they want to tell, without the, kind of these overbearing commercial imperatives placed on them. But in order to do that work, these presses need to be funded properly and supported, because it's not a level playing field. It's not a level playing field at all. And so as much as the report inevitably kind of focused on, you know, kind of the big publishing houses, the big writing agencies, the big booksellers kind of, you know, were a key theme throughout. But actually I think one of the things that I'm really kind of aware of is the more we can kind of decentralize the power of publishing, you know, and the better, because I think in the end it's the smaller independent presses that are kind of doing the most interesting, exciting work with writers of colour, but unfortunately they don't have the resources always to support those careers in a long-term sustainable way. So yeah. Well,
thank you both so much. It's been really, really great. It's been a really, really fascinating talking to you both.
Well, thank you for inviting us to speak.
Oh, you're so welcome. Just for everyone at home, I'll put links to all of the organisations that Sandra mentioned in our description, along with links to Words of Colour and Spread the Word, and to the report itself. So thank you all very much for watching.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye.